Okay, now I'd like to discuss an opening trap called the fishing pole. And it's an opening trap in the Roy Lopez Berlin defense. So let's just get to the Berlin defense. So that starts off by white playing e4, then e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, so over the Roy Lopez. Then black plays knight f6, the Berlin defense. White castles. And then the normal move in the Berlin defense would be for black to capture the pawn on e4. But here black plays knight to g4. And there's two basic continuations which have opening traps. And the first one I'm going to cover is h3, which I sort of call the fishing pole proper. I don't know if that's technically correct, but white, let's say, looks like very natural. Move h3, making the knight go back, but then black will play h5, tempting white to take the knight on g4. And white should never take the knight on g4 yet. So if you do, this is what happens. So if white takes the knight on g4, black will recapture. And now what happens is that there's this open file. So black has opened a file against the white king. It's removed a pawn, this h pawn, and it's forcing the defender to the king's side, one of the defenders of the king's side, to move. So the knight will come to h2, it could go to e1, and then black will play queen to h4, now threatening checkmate, and white will play f3 or f4, trying to provide an escape square for the king on f2, but that does not work. Black just pushes g3, taking away the escape square on f2 and threatening mate. So, like I said, don't take the knight in that circumstance. The other move, which is commonly played, is rook to e1, and then black has this nice follow-up of bishop to c5, hitting the f2 pawn twice. What white should play in this position is just move the rook back to f1, admitting you made a mistake, or you can move it to e2. But generally, white will want to play more aggressively, and because white doesn't want to admit it made a mistake, right? So d4 is commonly tried, but that fails to black playing knight takes d4. Now black is threatening to take the bishop on b5, and now white will commonly play knight takes d4, thinking that black is going to recapture with the bishop or even with the pawn. But here black has this beautiful move, queen to h4, hitting both the f2 and the h2 pawn. Now just remember here in this position, black just moved the queen, and actually so white has a knight and black only has a pawn, so technically white is up 2 pawns. So most players will try to what's going to happen is most players are going to play the knight back, thinking it's just going to lose a pawn, or they're just going to lose a pawn. The proper move in this position is actually to play bishop to e3, where play might continue queen takes, king over, knight takes e3, f takes e3, e takes d4, e takes d4. So that would be the correct way to play it, but a lot of players will play the knight to f3, and then this is the continuation. So we sort of already have 2 mistakes in a row. Sort of an opening trap, I guess, can be defined as you making a mistake and your opponent capitalizing on it. So what happens now is that black will play queen takes f2, check, the king will go to h1, and then this beautiful smother mate, queen to g1 check, and then the knight or the rook can take. I'll just take with the rook, and then knight to f2 checkmate. So that's what I sort of the two common opening traps in the fishing pole. So I guess the first question can be, well, what should white play when black plays knight to g4? Well, I'm not going to cover it, but the two moves are going to be c3 to prepare d4, or just to play d4 straight away. So those are the actual moves you should play. But what happens if you decide to go ahead with the fishing pole and then you say, well, what should I play? Can I take this knight at some point and sort of refute the fishing pole trap? And the answer is, well, not right away. And here's what I recommend. Instead of taking the knight, and this was emailed from a viewer, and I looked over the lines, and there's actually other lines I looked at, but his line looks to be the best, and maybe I disagree with him at the very end with one of the moves, but when you get 10 moves out, things can change a little bit. I agree that white should play d4, and then black is basically compelled, not really compelled, but probably the best move for black here is to take the pawn on d4. And this is going to be nice because, one, when black takes this pawn here, it's going to block this diagonal for the king, so this bishop can't utilize it. And two, it's going to free up this f4 square so that the bishop can come here and defend the h2 square. So after black takes on d4, the question is, can white take the knight and get away with it? Well, the answer is yes. Even though in the end I say the material is even and maybe white's king safety is not as good as black, so I don't know if I'd actually prefer the very ending to this, but it is somewhat, I don't know, unclear. It'll be interesting to play out the game, but you're not going to get checkmated by any means. Not to say you're going to come up with the most wonderful position, but it is playable. So white takes, and then black takes, and then the knight will come to h2. So we've seen this in the fishing pole, but the main difference is that black has taken the pawn on d4. Queen comes to h4, and now what? Well, as I mentioned, white now can play this move, bishop to f4, guarding h2, the knight on h2 and the h2 square. And now black, probably its best try is trying to get rid of the bishop. It's the main defender. So bishop to d6 looks sort of odd because it's blocking in the central pawn, and the bishop here cannot get out. Okay, and then if black plays bishop to d6, white can play e5, and then black will take with the knight, and then black will take with the knight, and then white will play rook to e1, not only giving a flight square for the king, but pinning the knight. Black will move the king to d8, getting out of the pin. Now this interesting move, rook takes e5. So just remember that black is trying to get rid of the bishop there. And now black will play f6, forcing the knight to move, or the rook to move, and then hopefully can capture the bishop and then eventually get the knight. But here white will play bishop to g3, forcing the queen to move. The queen can just move to h6. The rook comes back to e1. Then the bishop takes. F takes g3. The queen takes. The king comes f2, and then the queen can come to here, attacking the bishop over here. And the queen, whether the bishop move or the queen can just move. But this is sort of somewhat of the end result position, as you can see. In this position, the players get a knight for 3 pawns, and white's king safety is not as good as black's, even though black has been forced, can't castle and somehow has to get its pieces out. So I say somewhat unclear, even though material is even. That ends my discussion on the opening trap of the fishing pole.